This British passenger ship, SS Waratah, created huge headlines after it went missing in 1909.
There's mention that in the log, that they'd steamed a little over 15,000 miles in total.
Just now, the tale of the SS Waratah, swallowed whole by the ocean, sends shivers down the spine. Claude G Sawyer, a once peaceful traveler, was haunted by relentless nightmares of a spectral figure dripping from the sea, its whispers of Waratah chilling the night air. These visions were so vivid, so menacing, that he felt compelled to flee the ship as soon as it docked. What dark truth was Claude fleeing from that fateful night? Tune in as we unravel the ghostly warnings that foreshadowed the ship's mysterious end. Claude G Sawyer's fateful dream. Late one night in 1909, while the SS Waratah was sailing towards Durban, South Africa, a first-class passenger named Claude G Sawyer woke up and went out onto the deck. The sky was glowing red and the sea was rough. Suddenly, far off in the distance, a frightening figure appeared out of the ocean. It was holding a sword in one hand and a wet cloth in the other. As it came closer, the figure kept saying the word Waratah over and over. Then Sawyer woke up and realized it was all just a dream. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Waratah sailed into a thick fog that seemed to swallow the light itself, leaving everyone to wonder if the dreams were a premonition of something sinister waiting in the depths. The next day, the strange feeling from the dream didn't go away. In fact, every night after, the same scary figure showed up in his dreams, always shouting, "Waratah." This haunted Sawyer, and when the ship finally reached Durban, he felt like he couldn't stay on the ship any longer. So, he made the decision to get off and take a different ship to Cape Town instead. A few days after he left, the SS Waratah vanished with 211 people on board, never to be seen again. In the year 1869, a man named William Lund started a shipping company called the Blue Anchor Line. The company used sailing ships that traveled between London, South Africa, and Australia. By 1890, Lund and his sons decided to upgrade their fleet, switching from sailing ships to stronger steamers that could carry both cargo and passengers. Their ships stood out with their black and white funnels, marked by a blue anchor. But this wasn't where the story ends. In 1907, the Lund family wanted to expand their fleet even more, so they ordered a brand new ship from a shipyard in Glasgow called Barclay, Curle and Company. This new ship was based on an earlier liner called the SS Geelong, which was launched in 1904 and weighed 7,700 tons. However, the new ship would be much larger, almost 2,000 tons bigger. This made it the biggest and most luxurious ship in the Blue Anchor Line. The ship, known as Yard Number 472, was launched on September 12, 1908, and was christened by Mrs. J.W. Taverner, although, strangely, her first name was never mentioned anywhere. At over 9,000 tons and stretching 465 feet long and just over 59 feet wide, the SS Waratah was a large ship. It was powered by two strong steam engines that turned two propellers, giving the ship a cruising speed of about 13.5 knots. Built for safety, the ship had a double bottom, and its hull was divided into 8 watertight compartments to help prevent flooding. The Waratah offered luxury accommodations for up to 128 first-class passengers, complete with fancy staterooms, a grand saloon, and even a music lounge. It could also carry up to 300 third-class passengers. The ship was designed to be flexible, as it could turn its cargo space into dormitories for as many as 700 steerage passengers during outbound trips. On the return voyage, the space would switch back to carry general cargo to London. A crew of 154 people kept the ship running smoothly. After passing its sea trials on October 23, 1908, the Waratah was handed over to its owners and quickly began its short career. Under the leadership of Captain Joshua Edward Ilbrey, an experienced captain with 30 years in the business, the ship set sail from London on November 5, 1908, for its first official trip. However, this journey didn't go smoothly. A fire broke out in the engine room but was quickly put out, and repairs were made when the ship reached Sydney. The ship finished its trip, returning to London on March 7, 1909. Captain Ilbrey's concerns about the Waratah's stability hint at deeper troubles ahead. A premonition of doom aboard the Waratah. Upon returning, Captain Ilbery raised concerns about the ship's stability. He found that the Waratah was difficult to load properly, which made it tricky to balance the cargo. These issues were looked into during an investigation and even became the subject of big news stories. Still, Captain Ilbery, with all his experience, believed the ship was safe for its next voyage, which tragically became its final journey. The name Waratah refers to a flower native to southeastern Australia and is a symbol of New South Wales. Oddly, ships named Waratah seem to have bad luck. Before the Blue Anchor Line's Waratah, at least 4 other ships with the same name had disappeared, including one in the English Channel in 1848, another heading to Sydney in 1887, and a third in the Gulf of Carpentaria in 1897. The Waratah's last journey started on April 27, 1909, marking its second trip ever. At first, things went smoothly, but the ship hit rough weather while traveling from Adelaide to Melbourne. Still, it managed to reach Sydney in June without major trouble. After leaving Sydney on June 26th, the Waratah was carrying a heavy load of goods like bullion, wool, frozen meat, dairy, and flour. More cargo and passengers were picked up in Adelaide and Melbourne before continuing the voyage. She left Australia on July 7th with around 100 passengers, heading towards stops in South Africa. During the trip, Claude Gustav Sawyer, a Swiss engineer living with his family in Sussex, started to worry. He noticed serious problems with the ship's stability. Even though the sea was calm, the ship leaned heavily to one side, the starboard side, and then would quickly correct itself with such force that it injured 2 passengers, Mrs. Cawood and Miss Lascelles, as well as the ship's doctor, Dr. Howard Fulford. Mr. Sawyer didn't keep his concerns to himself. He told other passengers that he believed the ship, called the Waratah, was in danger. Sawyer was not only well-educated but also a seasoned traveler who understood how ships should behave in different sea conditions. As the journey went on, the ship's tilt seemed to get a little better, which made him feel somewhat relieved for a while. But about 3 or 4 days before they were due to reach Durban, he started having a disturbing, recurring dream. Each night, he saw a ghostly figure with a sword and a cloth soaked in blood. But that wasn't the worst part. Despite the frightening dream coming every night, only one other passenger, Mr. Ebworth, suggested that it could be a warning. Convinced by this interpretation, Mr. Sawyer decided to leave the ship when they reached Durban and find another way to continue his journey. He tried to convince other passengers to leave with him, but no one listened. He ended up disembarking alone when they arrived in Durban. The next day, the SS Waratah continued its voyage, setting off for Cape Town, South Africa. That night, Mr. Sawyer had one more terrifying dream. He saw the Waratah fighting against massive waves before a huge wave came and flipped the ship onto its starboard side, making it disappear into the sea. The Waratah was supposed to arrive in Cape Town, but it never did. Its disappearance led to a massive search, with many reported sightings and wild guesses about what happened to the brand new ship and the 211 people on board. The last confirmed sighting of the SS Waratah came from another ship, the steamship Clan McIntyre. The 2 ships exchanged signals as the newer, faster Waratah passed by the older steamer near the Bashi River. After that, the Waratah sailed out of sight and was never seen again. The Waratah disappears, leaving behind a trail of worry and unanswered questions. Faith lost in modern maritime marvels. The weather around the ship turned bad quickly, and a violent storm hit the next day. The captain of the Clan McIntyre said that these were some of the worst conditions he had seen in his 13 years of sailing. As the time for the Waratah to arrive passed, people started to get worried. It wasn't unusual for ships to be a little late, sometimes by a day or 2 or even a few weeks. But, despite being a new and advanced ship, the Waratah didn't have a wireless communication system, which meant it was completely cut off if something went wrong. As days turned into weeks, rumors and theories began to spread among the public and the media. People thought the Waratah couldn't sink, a belief that lasted until 3 years later when the Titanic disaster would make people question modern ship safety. Back then, people had full faith in ship designs. The Waratah had the latest technology, including watertight compartments and a double-bottom hull. It also had enough supplies to keep everyone on board safe for months. Many thought the ship had lost power and was drifting aimlessly. This idea seemed likely because in 1899, the SS Waratah had broken down near Cape Town and drifted for 100 days before being rescued, covering more than 2,000 miles. The tugboat T.E. Fuller was the first to search for the Waratah, but it had to return due to bad weather. Soon after, the Royal Navy sent out the cruisers HMS Pandora, Fort, and Hermes to search where the Waratah was last seen. The seas were so rough that the HMS Hermes got damaged and needed repairs. But that wasn't the worst part. There was a moment of hope when another Blue Anchor Line ship was spotted heading toward Durban, but it turned out to be a false alarm. Later, the Blue Anchor Line hired another ship, the Union Castle cargo ship Sabine, to search over 14,000 miles, but they found nothing. Months passed, and 4 months after the Waratah disappeared, Lloyd's of London officially declared it missing. Even so, in 1910, the relatives of passengers organized another search with the ship Wakefield. They searched for another 4 months and covered 15,000 miles. But once again, no trace of the Waratah or its passengers was found. In 1910, the Board of Trade conducted an official inquiry to find out what happened. But without any solid evidence or witness accounts, they couldn't provide a clear answer. Over the years, many theories came up, but two stood out the most. The most popular theory is that the ship was top-heavy, making it prone to tipping over, which would have been disastrous in the rough seas. The official inquiry spent a lot of time looking into this theory. The Waratah was built based on another ship, the Geelong, which had sailed safely for years. Many experts testified that the Waratah was well built and designed properly. It had passed multiple inspections by its builders, owners, the Board of Trade, and even 2 separate checks from Lloyd's of London, which gave it the highest rating. Yet rumors about the ship being unstable didn't go away. Some passengers from its first trip said it had serious stability problems. One passenger even mentioned that the ship tilted so much that it was impossible to take a bath. Mr. Sawyer, another passenger, was so worried about the stability that he decided to leave the ship before it disappeared. Even though there were reports about the Waratah having stability issues during investigations, many people still spoke highly of the ship and its performance. One of the passengers, Agnes Hay, had been on the Waratah's first trip and also traveled on its final, ill-fated voyage. She told her family and friends that she was happy with the ship and even praised the crew and officers. Her trust in the ship was clear because she chose to sail on it again. As doubts about the Waratah's safety grow, faith in its design is tested, a ship's mysterious fate. But if the Waratah really had such serious stability problems, how did it pass all the inspections? Why did so many passengers, crew members, and officers speak well of it? And why would Captain Ilbery, an experienced and respected captain, believe the ship was safe? Back then, it wasn't uncommon for ships to be a bit top-heavy, even famous ones. For example, the Imperator, which was built a few years later, was so unstable that people called it the Limperator. Even the RMS Queen Mary had a reputation for rolling in rough seas. So were some of the passengers just overreacting to what might have been a normal amount of rolling? Or did the Waratah have a real design flaw that made it unsafe? The idea of the ship being unstable is terrifying because if it were true, it could have flipped over in minutes, maybe even seconds. In that case, people on board would have had little time to realize what was happening, let alone try to escape. But this isn't even the most unsettling theory. There's another, less talked about idea that suggests the Waratah might have exploded, sinking it almost immediately. This theory gained some attention in the media back then and was based on a controversial eyewitness report. On the evening of July 27, Captain John Bruce of the Harlow and his crew saw 2 mast lights about 10 miles away from a ship producing an unusual amount of smoke. Shortly after, they saw 2 bright flashes in the distance, which they thought could have been a coal bunker or boiler explosion. The lights and smoke disappeared immediately after the flashes. The problem with the Harlow's story is that it doesn't match up with a confirmed sighting by another ship, the Clan McIntyre, which had communicated with the Waratah earlier that day. For the Harlow to have seen the Waratah at the coordinates they claimed, the Waratah would have had to turn back toward Durban for some unknown reason. Still, Captain Bruce and his crew stood by their account. In fact, Bruce even suggested they search for the wreck about 3 or 4 miles from the mouth of the St. John River, where they had seen the ship burning and exploding. A boiler explosion isn't entirely impossible, especially since the Waratah had already experienced a fire in its engine room not long before. It's possible that the fire caused more damage to one of the ship's boilers than anyone realized, leading to a devastating explosion. There were reports of burned debris found in the area and other explosions, though none of this was ever officially confirmed. These explosions at sea made ships sink quickly, leaving very little behind on the surface. But it's important to be careful with these stories. Many of them were told months after the events, often shared through newspapers. Over time, the details were changed to make the stories more gripping. The Waratah disaster was a huge blow for the Blue Anchor Line. Their reputation was shattered, and eventually they had to sell their fleet to P&O. The Waratah's final location is still unknown, and we may never really find out what happened. Over 200 people disappeared with the Waratah more than 100 years ago, and none of them have been found since. Despite several attempts to locate the ship over the years, the vastness of the ocean and the time that has passed make it unlikely that the wreck will ever be found. But that's not even the worst part. For those who lost their lives, this might not matter, but for the rest of us, the mystery of tragedies like the Waratah pulls at our need to understand the world. When someone we care about disappears, we want answers. We want a complete story, something that makes sense and gives us closure. The story of the Waratah's first voyage casts a shadow over its mysterious fate, haunting tales from the high seas. Yet as time passes and the tools we use to piece together history break down, the unknowns keep growing. We are left wondering, trying to grasp what the future holds. Traveling by sea has always been full of dangers. Stories of massive sea monsters like the Kraken and haunted ships like the Flying Dutchman have captured people's imaginations for centuries. Shipwrecks like the Titanic have left a deep mark on human history, but there are other lesser-known stories that are just as interesting. For example, the Titanic wasn't the only unsinkable ship to be claimed by the ocean. The SS Waratah, another passenger steamship, disappeared without a trace just 3 years before the Titanic. In the fall of 1907, a British shipbuilder called Barclay Curley in Glasgow received an order to build a new ship. This ship needed to carry both cargo and passengers for the Blue Anchor Line. It was named the SS Waratah, and its first launch into the water happened on September 12, 1908. The design for the Waratah was based on another ship called the SS Geelong, but the builders made improvements so that it would be even better. The ship was intended for trips between Europe and Australia, offering fast travel and fancy accommodations. The Waratah was 465 feet long and weighed about 9,339 tons. It had 8 beautiful staterooms, a large salon, and a lavish music lounge with a special area for musicians to play. The ship was also planned to transport emigrants, so its cargo spaces were turned into large dormitories that could hold almost 700 passengers on the journey out. On the way back, these same areas were used to carry frozen meat, dairy, wool, and metal ores from Australia. The ship had a strong steel hull and was powered by 2 sets of quadruple expansion steam engines. It also had a special double-bottom structure that was divided into 8 watertight sections. This design led many to believe the Waratah was nearly impossible to sink, perhaps why they chose not to install a radio, which was a common choice back then, but the story takes a darker turn. On November 5, 1908, the Waratah set off on its first voyage from London. It carried 689 third-class passengers and 67 first-class passengers, all ready for an exciting journey. Little did they know, the fate of this grand ship would serve as a haunting reminder of the unpredictable dangers that lurk in the ocean. However, that wasn't the worst part of the story. The real mystery is what happened next. The Waratah, despite all its advanced features, would never reach its final destination. Captain Joshua Edward Ilbrey was an experienced navigator with 30 years of sailing under his belt. He led a crew of 154 people on board the Waratah. After a short stop in Cape Town, the ship reached Adelaide on December 15, 1908. While the journey was mostly smooth, there were a few problems along the way. In early December, a small fire started in the lower part of the ship near the starboard bunker. It was put out by noon, but kept flaring up for the next 4 days until it was completely gone. It was believed that the heat from steam valves in the engine room caused the fire. The starboard side of the engine room wasn't properly insulated, unlike the ceiling. The ship had to make a quick stop in Sydney for some repairs before finally arriving in Adelaide. On January 9, 1909, the Waratah began its return journey to London. carrying food, wool, and about 1,500 tons of metal concentrates. It reached London on March the 7th, marking the end of its very first trip. After the cargo was unloaded, the ship went through some minor repairs and was checked by an inspector from Lloyd's. Captain Ilberry and his crew had some worries about how the ship handled. The captain was especially concerned about how hard it was to load the steamship in a way that kept it balanced. A passenger, Mrs. Peyton, later told the Daily News in Perth that the ship swayed more than any other she had been on. She even said it reminded her of a ship from the White Star Line, known for its shaky stability. What do you think caused the Waratah struggles? And could the crew have prevented the ominous outcomes? Comment your theories below, and don't forget to subscribe for more intriguing stories.